I love those words. Every word in that song was a message. Sometimes we face stormy weather, and sometimes the sky is clear and blue. Got a combination going on out there now. But nothing ever lasts forever, and sometimes that is the good news. He says, you know the sun is shining for you, so rise up, child of God, and let your light come shining through. That's all about what we're talking about this week and next week, about Easter, resurrection, that we have that light within us. Dr. Ernest Holmes, the architect of our philosophy, said it this way. He said, life is like the sun. It shines on everything. So get out of the shadows. Crawl out of your basement. He said that. That's when he must have lived where they had basements, I guess. Get out of your basement. Open the windows of your mind. Open the doors of your soul. Lift up your thought and let life be to you whatever you wish it to be. Learn to resurrect yourself. Wow. So it is the season to think about resurrection. Our theme on the sign outside says, spring is life saying, let's party. Let's party. It's after the winter and things have been kind of, subdued in nature, even here. And then when springtime comes, it's an example of resurrection of that new life. Let's party. Let's dance. Now, next Sunday, Easter Sunday, we're going to have a very special, very unique service. Do not miss it. Bring your friends. It's just going to be a really wonderful and participatory service. So today I thought I would give you kind of a preview of how we look at Easter and something to think about during the week as you are preparing and hearing people talk about Easter, everything from, the Easter outfit, the Easter bunny, the Easter hat, all of that. Here's something for you to think about as well. Now, here at the center, we frequently do draw on stories from the Bible, not literally, but symbolically, because there's so much power, so much lasting real-life message in them, beneath and behind the literal stories of the Bible. Last week, if you were here to hear Reverend Dennis Jones, he spoke of a biblical story and brought it into, of course, not the literal, but the figurative meanings and the metaphorical meanings and how we could look at it in our daily lives. And so today, in anticipation of Easter, let's, during the course of this coming week, consider the Easter season and the celebration of all of that and what it can mean to us, what it can mean to us now in our daily walking around lives. The Easter story is just a powerful metaphor for us to help us recognize our personal resurrections. And, yes, to recognize the painful crucifixions that often precede these personal resurrections. To recognize them for what they are, which overall, often there's a whole lot in between, but what they are entrees to newness, to all things new. Jean Houston, many of you know of Jean Houston, a brilliant mind, and she said this about resurrection. She said, resurrection is essentially a remembrance of our true nature and a waking up to this remembrance. Something within. It's not something out there. And it's as Dr. Holmes said in the reading I just gave you, resurrect yourself. Resurrect yourself. So we can have that Easter resurrection experience, not just once, but many, many times in our lives. And I've noticed even sometimes many times in a day, we can have that experience. And within the Easter story experience, there's this powerful promise that no matter what you're going through, no matter what challenges you're facing, the Spirit within you, the Spirit of resurrection, is more powerful than any of these. And that is the fundamental promise in the Easter story. Another early New Thought writer, Catherine Ponder, said it this way. She said, the real message of Easter is that of going through tough times, learning from them, and then letting Spirit in you resurrect your life out of the painful circumstances and into something better. So they're all bringing it into our own personal experience. And don't we need those reminders? And I need those reminders myself, and I need them often said in different words and by means of different stories. I say, oh, is that what that meant? I knew that, but I forgot. That's what that means. So that's why we're talking about Easter today in this way. So here, just as a recap, is a summary of the Bible story of Easter in 5 simple phrases. First of all, Jesus, the master teacher, remember he was the great example, not the great exception. Jesus, the master teacher, was one who had a message of unconditional love and compassion. He was loved and adored by many, but he was also despised by many because they just didn't understand him. He was sorely misunderstood. Have you ever had your best efforts, your best intentions be totally misunderstood, and then there's a reaction that follows that you say, wait a minute, that's not what I was saying at all? Well, that's what he was going through, so much so that eventually he was betrayed, and betrayed by some of those the very closest to him. So, as a result, the second part of this summary, he was sentenced to die on a cross, death by crucifixion. A horrible, horrible death. Number 3, then, after this, he was buried in the tomb, sealed with a huge boulder, big stone tomb. On the 3rd day, then the 4th part of this is on the 3rd day, he mysteriously was gone from that tomb. And number 5, soon after this, he appeared to his very stunned disciples. And then he, as the story goes, he ascended to be with his Father in heaven. Resurrection. Now, historians and Bible scholars have many variations and many interpretations, and there have been many disputes and discussions about what really, really happened, because it's a pretty far-out story, isn't it? And so it's been a material for a lot of in-depth study and discussion. We're not going to go into all of that today, but I want to share just one perspective, and that's from Bishop John Shelby Spong, who wrote a book. He was a scholar, and he was a priest, Episcopal, and he wrote a book called Resurrection, Myth or Reality. And he researched it extensively, and here's what he said. Many things in that book. It's a wonderful book. If you want to really get into exploring it from his perspective, I recommend it. No matter how much we probe the text for literal details, he says, no matter how many questions we raise, we still need not reject the truth and power of the resurrection experience. We would not have an Easter tradition unless there had been an experience so real that earthbound words could not capture it. So that's where I love to focus on the experience. So the 3 major elements of the story then are the crucifixion, the tomb, and the resurrection. Now, let's talk a little bit about this crucifixion thing. Have you ever gone through anything that now you're thinking about it? You say, yeah, that was kind of felt like a crucifixion experience. You might not have thought about it in those terms, but it could be a time of bitter disappointment, tragedy, a devastating loss, betrayal, some kind of sudden traumatizing change. Walter Starkey, who wrote a book, It's All God, said this about those experiences that we're now saying those are our crucifixion experiences. He said, each of us knows, deep down, that our greatest crucifixions have revealed our greatest resurrections, bringing us ever closer to greater illumination. What does he mean by illumination? Greater wisdom, greater insight, greater strength, greater growth. It's a pretty simple statement, pretty profound if you think about it. And as you reflect this week, think about all of those crucifixions in your life, and then see how they have ultimately revealed some kind of a resurrection experience for you, and often a very profound and powerful one of change, of transformation, of wisdom. And of course, Pema Chodron, that American Buddhist nun who wrote a book that I think is so wonderful called When Things Fall Apart. When Things Fall Apart. And in this book, she's talking about this experience in this way. She says, when everything falls apart, reaching our limit, when we meet the place where we feel we're about to die, emotionally the experience, we're about to die, everything, life is over for me, she said it's actually a sign of health because, and here comes the promise, as she says for herself, she says, when I move in amazing grace through apparent annihilation, I discover in me that which is indestructible. And we can't discover that until we're pushed up against something, right? And it's there. That's something in every one of us that is indestructible. So that is crucifixion, that is resurrection. So as the Easter story continues, after the crucifixion, Jesus was buried in this tomb. It was an above-ground tomb, as the story goes, and, big stone thing with the big stone in front of the opening. And in the conventional view, of course, burial in a tomb seems like pretty final, pretty irretrievable. No one's getting out of that. And, of course, death, it seems pretty final, too, in our human perspective. And that would seem to be the end of the story. But in this story, I see it as an invitation to look at that time in the tomb as the in-between time, the in-between time. All the great spiritual masters and even psychologists, even therapists, will tell us life is full of beginnings and endings that become beginnings and endings. It's a cycle of beginnings and endings, beginnings and endings. And even death is not an end. All of these are always the beginning of something new, the potential of resurrection. There always has to be, between the beginning and the ending and the beginning, that in-between time, and that is symbolized by the tomb. And there's a good reason for this. Now, I don't know about you, but for me, I generally don't like the in-between time. If I've been knocked down in some way, I want instant reversal, instant healing, instant fix of whatever has happened. As one of my very respected ministers up in Seattle, Reverend Kathy Ann Lewis, she said, I'm really good at beginnings and I'm really good at endings, but I'm not good at middles. But that's not nature's way to skip the middle part. That's not life's way. So like it or not, we need that in-between time for our inner work, for our inner healing, for processing, sometimes for grieving or coming to terms with what has happened. This is the time in the tomb. So the time in the tomb is not all bad. What might that time look like for us? Could be a time of stillness, a time of quietness, of maybe saying, for a while, I'm not going to do anything. A place to reflect and come into acceptance and surrender, like the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Surrendering our resistance, surrendering our struggle. And that doesn't happen overnight. So there needs to be that space where we can come to that place. And it could also be a place of creative incubation. Have you noticed? When you're in that in-between place and what was seems to be fading away and what is not real clear, what's coming is not real clear, but in that space is a space of incubation, of creative ideas germinating and bubbling. And it's interesting to think about the tomb in the story again. It was impenetrable stone, and the way out was the way to release, the way to freedom, the way to life, to something new, the opening was blocked by this huge boulder, and they make a big deal of this in the story of it was a big stone that couldn't be just rolled away, which is why they were wondering, how did he get out of that tomb? How did Jesus get out of there? There's this big, big boulder. Well, how symbolic that boulder is for us. When we're in that in-between space, that tomb phase, we can feel helpless and trapped, especially if we feel blocked by the heavy boulder at the door. What would that boulder be? Well, our perception that things are hopeless, our perception that things are hopeless because of the way things appear, because of the things that appear to be in the way. But the operative word here is appears. And this is one of the core principles of science of mind that I love so much. And it is really the good news, which is that appearances are never, ever the whole story. They're not even the true story. But boy, are they convincing. So it's the appearance of what seems to be in the way that can be that big boulder in front of the tomb that won't let us move into freedom and new life from what has happened. Okay, so how long do we have to stay in that tomb between our crucifixion and our resurrection? Well, in the Easter story, after his death through crucifixion, Jesus remained buried in the tomb for how many days? 3 days, right. Well, we know it wasn't literally 3 days. I mean, they didn't even measure time in the same way that we do, minutes, hours, and linear like that. But 3 is a number meant to denote completion, when the time was fulfilled. So it could be 5 minutes and it could be 3 years. It's when we're ready, then the next phase can happen. So that's our time in the tomb. Dr. Ernest Holmes again said, he said, we love the idea of resurrection, but it's very difficult for us to unwrap the shroud of our previous experience, our stories, the history, the appearances. I'm adding that in. We love the idea of resurrection, but to unwrap that shroud of all that we knew, all that was tangible. It reminds me, what he said there reminds me of, you've heard this, you can fly, but the cocoon has to go. We love the idea of resurrection, but we also kind of like that cozy little cocoon, as confining as it might be. So we remain in the tomb, that in-between place, until the time is fulfilled, until we have processed or evolved or healed sufficiently, until we have a new idea, until we have a new perspective. And then the stone is easily rolled away. Now in the story, it says an angel rolled away the stone from the door of the tomb, the entrance of the tomb. And the metaphysical meaning of angel is a higher idea. A higher idea. How perfect is that? And so that's when we are able to be free from the tomb, is when we have moved to that place internally of being open to and grasping a higher idea, a new idea. And so then the third part of the story, of course, is the culmination, the Easter, the resurrection. And again, let me remind you, Jesus was not the exception. He was the example. He said, these things that I do, you can do, and even greater. So let's talk about resurrection. And again, as a literal story goes, of course, it was a miracle defying all the laws of nature. I mean, all that we would, say, this don't make no sense. But the symbology of Jesus' resurrection exemplifies transformation and freedom. He was setting the example. However that happened, literally, whatever the story around it, the message from him was one of our own transformation and freedom. And so that newness, that's an Easter message worth singing our praises about. That's worth celebrating. That's why we celebrate Easter. Behold, I make all things new. Think about your life. What's going on right now? And during the course of this week, are you feeling still in the crucifixion mode? Are you in the in-between mode? Are you in that tomb place? You can't rush it. All I'm suggesting is just be aware of it. Be aware of it and know that the end of the story is always all things new, a new idea, a new perspective, if we're open to it. I think even in your song that you sang, there was a part that said, that's the part we can control, is our perspective. Dr. Holmes, again, assures us, in so many ways, he reassures us about all things being made new, that is the very nature of life within each one of us and all around us. He said, everything is continually being recreated. The creative spirit is forever making all things new. We must permit it to make them new for us. We don't have to make things new. We must permit it. And sometimes maybe we need to go back into that tomb space to get out of the way so it can bring about the newness. Maybe we need to step back from trying to fix it, change it, and just be in the place of openness and receptivity, because it will happen. It will happen. It's the natural impulse of life itself. That means you can begin again. We can begin again wherever we raise our perspective, turning our attention away from the world of appearances, of conditions, so convincing, so seductive, but turning our attention from those and toward the realm of infinite possibility, limitless potential. What's that look like? Because sometimes you know that again might sound like a really swell idea, but what does that mean? What does it look like? Well, for me, I love to think of it as a space, limitless potential, unlimited possibility, as something that's unlimited by space-time parameters. So if whatever you're thinking about, you slip into, but I don't know, there's this, and this situation, reason, something in the way of it, you're back in the realm of space-time parameters, inevitably. So move one step higher. Infinite possibility means that space that is way beyond all of that, the place where things truly are made new. That divinity within each one of you, ultimately. But I'm doing it like it's out there. It's huge, and yet it's within. It's inside each one of us. And again, this can happen many, many times in life. The old dies, and the potential for something new is born. We hospice the old, and we midwife the new. So I'm going to close with this little bit longer quote from Dr. Ernest Holmes. Listen to it carefully. I love it so much because it's just so real life. And then Bob is going to be anchoring all of this with a marvelous song. Really says it all. So Dr. Holmes said this. He said, no matter what the negations of yesterday may have been, your affirmations of today may rise triumphant over them. So cease weeping over the mistakes and experiences of yesterday and steadfastly beholding the light of the great and divine reality, walk in that light where there is no darkness. Because, as he goes on and he affirms, today I have confidence in the good, in the enduring, and in the true. I rest in calm assurance. I have confidence in the future and enthusiastic expectation of good things to come. The Spirit in me makes all things new. And that to me is the essence of the Easter experience.